For the monsters of Rise, inspiration was chiefly taken from yokai and folkloric tales of Japan, influencing the design and attributes of the various beasts that live around Kimura village and acting as the mainstay of our hunts. But what do you do in the case for elder dragons? Those mysterious and in many cases barely understood creatures that seem as much a force of nature or feature of the landscape as they do living beings. Most yokai are beings and creatures with a level of magical ability or strength that is greater and more terrifying than the average human can handle, but in many cases they can be overcome much the same. So what do you do with beings of such power as elder dragons? There are only a select number of yokai that I know of that possess the sheer power and influence and cause significant destruction comparable to such beasts. A Laoshan lung-sized multi-headed serpent could represent Yamato no Orochi. Perhaps a manner of giant fanged beast covered in bone with a vampiric nature could be the terrifying Gashadokuro, or an enormous dragon-headed centipede like Neopteron in place of the fearsomely armoured Omukade. All valid options whose folklore and attributes could make for interesting monsters, that's for certain. But Capcom went for something quite different entirely. Rather than looking at the realm of yokai or yurei for inspiration, they instead looked into the realm of gods. Perhaps not unreasonable as a way to show the sheer distinction in power between the average monster and the most fearsome species that the world of Monster Hunter has to offer. I imagine that deciding upon a kami to base the elder dragon in question on must have been quite difficult. As it is, in the end, we got Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa, who joined the small group of wingless Eastern-inspired elder dragons with power over the wind and sky. The previous entrants being Amatsu Magasuchi and Shantien. Ibushi and Narwa are based on the Japanese kami of Wind and Thunder respectively, Raijin and Fujin. Chances are that if you're a fan of anime or Japanese culture in particular, that you've likely seen some representation or influence from this divine duo somewhere. And a duo they most certainly are, as they are so linked to be practically attached at the hip culturally, just like the serpents themselves. So then, with that out of the way, let's take a look at Raijin and Fujin and how they have influenced the design of Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa when it comes to Monster Hunter Rise. Almost invariably appearing together for their contrasting divine authorities and further stylistic contrasts, Raijin and Fujin are the children of the Japanese creator deities Izanagi and Izanami, though their actual birth is somewhat non-standard. When Izanami was giving birth to the gods of Japan, the birth of the god of flames, Kagusuchi, burned her to death. In his grief, and much like plenty of other mythological figures across the world, Izanagi ventured to Yomi, the Japanese underworld, to return her to the living. Alas, when he found her, she ordered that he not look at her, as she had eaten the food cooked in the furnace of Yomi. But, losing patience, Izanagi lit up a fire, and only then did he see that Izanami had become a rotting corpse covered in demons and maggots, and he fled. In her fury, Izanami sent Raijin and Fujin, who she birthed after dying, and a horde of demons and warriors to chase Izanagi, and he barely managed to block the entrance to the underworld with a great stone. Through a tiny crack in the stone, a number of her children escaped, including Raijin and Fujin. Whether or not the two deities are still chasing Izanagi or have since been talked down, I could find no source on. The two are also credited with a somewhat more recent event. During the Mongol invasions of 1274 and 1281, it is said that the Mongol fleet was repelled by the brothers. Fujin destroyed the ships and blew them away with a divine wind, whilst Raijin rained down thunder and lightning in arrow-like volleys. Both are typically depicted riding clouds as a means of flight, and are large, muscular, demon-like figures whose power makes their hair defy gravity and flow or stand on end. Raijin, the god of thunder, is frequently depicted with red skin, and is almost always surrounded in taiko drums that create the sound of thunder when he plays them with his large clubs. These drums are typically decorated with a tomoe, an ancient symbol over 4,000 years old, and one often associated with another Japanese god, Hachiman. Fujin, by contrast, often has green skin, and carries on his shoulders an immense silken bag that contains all the world's wind, and which he opens to unleash them. Whilst Raijin appears a figure fully native to Japan, Fujin's origins might be more wide-ranging. Indeed, his appearance might not originally be from Japan in the first place at all, but rather from ancient Greece. You see, Japan has something of a tradition of importing deities, legends, and monsters from other countries. Most notably perhaps the various Buddhist bodhisattvas, who originated in India, were imported into China, and then directly to Japan from either Korea or China itself. But Fujin is from even further afield, as mentioned before, all the way to ancient Greece. The ancient Greek wind god Boreas is often depicted with a billowing cloak that he must hold to his shoulders, and was imported into northern India and Afghanistan during the conquest of Alexander the Great, and integrated into Greco-Buddhist art and architecture that flourished after his death. This artistic style led to all manner of curious works, such as paired cupids flying over the Buddha's head, or the Titan Atlas holding up a Buddhist monument. From here, Boreas became the Buddhist deity Wado, who became Feng Bo after being imported into China, and then became Fujin when he came to Japan. In each manifestation, he has the distinctive billowing cloth object, the cloak becoming a bag of wind, possibly due to some confusion of aspects from the Greek god Aeolus, who had a bag containing the winds of the world that he gave to Odysseus. But it certainly seems that for a god carrying all the world's wind, Fujin has certainly travelled across a good amount of it before settling in Japan. In terms of biology, it's rather hard to compare the divine duo of Raijin and Fujin to Ibushi and Narwa. Seeing as the former are humanoid demons and Ibushi and Narwa are, well, some manner of giant leviathan with about as many similar physical characteristics to humanoids as there are between a praying mantis and a sea slug. If nothing else though, there is something for us to examine, and that is Ibushi's wind sacs, which it uses to produce, accumulate and direct the gas with which it relies upon for flight, which are based upon Fujin's own sac of wind that he carries upon his shoulder. Also, of course, there is the command the pair of serpents have over wind and lightning respectively, and I think I need to say very little on how that draws a link between them and Raijin and Fujin. The ability of both monsters to fly without obvious means might be something of an oblique reference as well. In the world of Monster Hunter, things being able to fly without wings is hardly a new development. The other wind serpents do so, of course, and we have other monsters like Valstrax, which fly in abnormal ways as well. But the control that Ibushi and Narwa have over their flight is frankly beyond most of these others, able to spin, rotate and levitate as though suspended in zero gravity thanks to their gases and electromagnetism. Raijin and Fujin make use of their divine power to stand and stride atop the clouds without use of wings or other such means of locomotion, so perhaps this unnatural movement was in some way inspired and made use of to create Ibushi and Narwa as well. Both Ibushi and Narwa's weapons frequently mention both wind and thunder fittingly enough. In themselves, however, they do little more to reference back to Raijin and Fujin in particular. I mean, they could be created from the parts of any wind or thunder elder dragon, and bar mentioning them by name, there is little else to really tie them back. But what does call far more back on Raijin and Fujin's imagery is the armor set for the Serpent pair. If we take a look at Ibushi's set first and compare it to how Fujin is often depicted, many similarities become obvious. The vaguely demonic face on the male variant is not far off that of the armor's inspiration, or indeed how many demons are depicted in Japan, complete with horns and boar-like tusks, although this is lacking on the female armor. There is also Fujin's distinctive bag of wind resting on the shoulders of both male and female set, the divine paraphernalia of Fujin that could theoretically be opened to unleash the winds of the world upon Kimura and the monsters around it. The set does have the wind alignment skill on it as well as further reference, although this only serves to increase dragon resistance and give the great luck skill when fully assembled, rather than something more relevant to Fujin's legends. Narwa's set, just like Ibushi's, has the same demonic face mask, although personally Narwa's looks far more like the subject matter compared to Ibushi's, and has the same tusks and horns as before. Again, this feature is lost on the female set, unfortunately. But on the plus side, just like with Ibushi's, both have something on the shoulders and behind the head to call back on their divine inspiration. You see these 5 suspended rings? Well, these are calling back on the 5 taiko drums that are often depicted positioned behind and around Raijin's head, and which he uses to call down thunder and lightning. The set also gives the thunder alignment skill, just as Ibushi's gave wind alignment, increasing thunder resistance fittingly and giving great luck just like its brother set. As an interesting final note about the armour, both sets have horns atop the head. Ibushi's having a single central horn and Narwa's having 2. This might seem an unimportant detail, but often in art, both ancient and modern, Raijin and Fujin have similar horns, with Fujin having the one and Raijin having two. The Palico gear goes a step even further than this with its armour for our feline companions. Not only do both Ibushi and Narwa's set for them both have the bag of wind and taiko drums as with the hunters, but they also both sit upon clouds as though they were tiny little gods. This of course is how Raijin and Fujin are often depicted as well, among and riding atop clouds high in the heavens. Ibushi's weapon for the Palico is a fan, an object often associated in Japan with the summoning of winds and gales, and that's certainly how the Tengu like to use it. Narwa's Palico weapon is, fittingly enough, a drum, although it does not look like any variety of taiko drum I have ever seen. The little paw print where the tomoe would go on Raijin's drum certainly made me smile a little bit. When it comes to the Palamute weapons, Ibushi's is a blade with little relation that I could find to Fujin, but Narwa's is this staff, which looks quite a great deal like the sort of drumstick that Raijin is often shown to use to play his drums. So then, I think that just about covers everything here, right? Oh, wait. Allmother Narwa. Well, to be honest, she somewhat threw a wrench in this whole script when she first came out, as I desperately racked my brain trying to think of an explanation and inspiration, if indeed there is one to be had, to explain her. Certainly for how often they're shown together, or even having a brotherly squabble, I cannot recall or find any legends of Raijin consuming his brother's power to become greater than before. It might simply be a gameplay mechanic, with no callbacks to any particular mythology at all, to be honest, and one I find quite probable. That being said, I have two other ideas about what legendary Super Saiyan Narwa might be referring to. Firstly, Allmother Narwa is master not only over thunder but wind as well, and when we imagine what manner of natural disaster combines both these elements and is also prevalent enough in Japan, we get typhoons. Indeed, alongside volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, and resulting tsunamis, typhoons are the most significant natural disasters that strike the Japanese archipelago. On average, 10 of these immense storms come within 300 miles of Japan a year, and about 3 actually make landfall on the main islands. But sometimes it can be as high as 12. Thus, Allmother Narwa may represent not just Raijin and Fujin, but the Japanese kami of storms, Susanoo no Mikoto, combining the power of wind and thunder to create something even more destructive. Alternatively, Narwa's new title of Allmother may be far more literal a reference. Both Raijin and Fujin were born from the mother goddess of almost all of the Japanese gods, Izanami, and perhaps this is where we can find the true inspiration for Narwa. For one, we fight Allmother Narwa in a slowly deepening pit downwards, a quite literal underworld that at parts even reaches cave systems, as underworlds are so often described. Many of Allmother Narwa's parts specifically mention origin, be it the horn, scale, or orb of origin. And of course Izanami is the origin of the Japanese pantheon, and pretty much the origin of the world. There are a few primordial deities that come before Izanami and Izanagi, but they were the pair that raised Japan from the bottom of the ocean using a spear. The twin elder dragons desire to create a paradise may purely be in reference to creating the ideal condition for them to rear their young, but both Izanagi and Izanami already did that in their legends by creating and shaping the world just as Allmother Narwa certainly can now. And if you remember back to earlier in the video, Izanami unleashed Raijin, Fujin and other beasts upon Izanami as revenge for him gazing upon her, but there is an additional part to that story. Izanami, as Izanagi ran from her, cursed the world so that 1,000 people would die a day. And in response, Izanagi said he would ensure that 1,500 new people were born in response. If Allmother Narwa does indeed represent Izanami, then perhaps her desire to recreate the world anew could be from this curse, intending to start completely all over again. And supporting that, it is mentioned in Allmother Narwa's Falls and Pauldrons that she wants to quite literally start over. As I said, this is mere conjecture, and if there is a Rise art book that has any notes on Allmother Narwa, then I'll certainly be perusing it for more details and further links on it. So then, that's the divine duo of Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa, and their inspirations from Raijin and Fujin from Shinto. I'm curious about how you could implement the other Shinto gods as inspiration for monsters in Rise. Although perhaps I should keep most of my ideas to myself before we have a monster inspired by Amaterasu, who alternates between sulking in a cave, causing eclipses, and firing solar lasers down at the hunter. Even if they do not take any further inspiration, I rather like what they've done with Ibushi and Narwa in the end, even if at first I was busy trying to work out just what on earth they had done with the design when it came to the terrifying jaws. Raijin and Fujin have long been among my favourite of the Japanese kami, and to see many of their aspects brought into the game and used as inspiration is very cool. Even if many of my speculations about Allmother Narwa representing Izanami or Susanoo are false, I think the parallels and possible links are interesting enough to speculate on, and I'd be interested to hear what anyone else has to think on the matter. Thank you to anyone who has reached this far in the video, and I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the cultural origins and potential inspiration for Wind Serpent Ibushi and Thunder Serpent Narwa. I'm still deciding on which Rise monster I should do for the next video, but hopefully you guys will find that one interesting as well. But until then, happy hunting everyone.